Hey guys, Freedom Boys back with another video, just sort of illustrating how corporations gang stalk and mob their employees and private contractors. In this video, I want to look at 7 steps or 7 tactics that corporations usually use, and it usually starts with upper management or the executive committee, and it kind of filters down to the rank and file within the company. But a lot of these steps take place and they overlap. You'll see a lot of these steps happen verbatim as they're listed here. So I want to go through each step here or each tactic and just kind of comment on it. Let's begin.
The online auction site eBay launched the e-commerce revolution when it was founded more than 20 years ago. Over the decades, it's drawn in 134 million users, from mom and pop collectors on the hunt for bargains to small business owners. But last month, buried in an otherwise dull annual financial disclosure, a note on page 105 hinted at a scandal inside the Silicon Valley giant. It refers to an inquiry from the U.S. Attorney about the stalking and harassment of the editor and publisher of an online newsletter at the hands of eBay employees. Tonight, we will introduce you to the couple that was the target of that stalking. They loved eBay so much, they started a publication to help people who sell stuff on the auction site, and then found themselves the focus of a terror campaign.
All right, so you can see here this couple here worked for eBay, and they started this online publication, essentially just kind of giving a lot of reviews on various companies, a lot of Wall Street companies, as well as Fortune 500 companies that were interested in trading using eBay. And it kind of really disturbed the execs at eBay. And as a result, they retaliated by starting a vicious campaign of stalking and harassment on this couple. Now, let's go ahead and continue with the story.
You called it psychological warfare. It felt like corporate terrorism because we were terrorized, and it was very calculated. It was very vicious.
One of the things that we also learned was what sadistic pleasure these people took in terrorizing us.
All right, so the details in this video has to do with cyberstalking, but it also relates to gang stalking or stalking by proxy. Let's continue.
Tell me what happened when you opened your email on the morning of August 8th.
Well, we were getting bombarded with sign-ups to crazy newsletters.
Newsletters the Steiners never signed up for. Sin City Fetish Night, the Satanic Temple, the Communist Party, and dozens of others.
Then somebody started harassing us on Twitter through direct messages.
What were you seeing on Twitter?
Threats.
It was basically shut up or else, and it was as blatant as.
All right, so one of the first tactics that's used to kind of harass and overwhelm the target includes signing them up to a lot of unwanted email. They'll get a lot of email coming into their inbox, which essentially sensitizes them to every type of electronic mail that comes their way through the email inbox.
But much more threatening than that, and so vulgar, we can't show you many of the messages. 3 days later, the Steiners got a strange call.
Tactic number 2 is unwanted messages. Usually the target will get a flood of messages coming in, not only to their email account, but they'll get text messages as well. What this does essentially is sensitize the targeted individual to any type of electronic message that comes in, whether it's legitimate messaging or unwanted messages.
Somebody left a voicemail for us saying they couldn't fulfill the order for a wet specimen. And David was the one who called, and he said, "What is a wet specimen?" And it was a pig fetus. That's when my heart sank, because I thought, who might be angry at something I wrote? And I couldn't figure it out. I mean, we were desperately trying to think, who could it be?
Is that when you called the police?
Every step along the way,
that was the first.
We would report it, and when the police drove up to the front door, we had to put on, a rational face. We couldn't show how terrified we were.
After the police officer took the report, he stepped outside and said, "There's a package here." So he waited, and when I opened up the package, it looked like flesh and hair, and I kind of yelled or shrieked.
It was a pig mask from the horror movie Saw. The plot involves a psychopath who tortures his victims. The last thing they see is the mask.
Each one of the tactics that are used in cyberstalking or gang stalking is designed essentially to kind of lead the mind of the target to kind of redefine his surroundings, redefine her life in such a way where everything becomes very sensitive to the target. And this is done for the purpose of overwhelming the target's central nervous system or mind so that they become very paranoid, which ultimately leads to kind of a post-traumatic stress experience.
I imagine as this is happening, you're not only thinking, who is this person, but what are they going to do next?
Oh, that was the question. What are they going to do next?
Over the next week, someone sent boxes of live cockroaches and spiders to the Steiners. Pornography was sent to their neighbors but addressed to David.
Now, this is when the smear campaign actually begins, and you'll notice that it's carefully orchestrated because whoever's doing it obviously knows where the target lives, who the target interacts with. They seem to know details about the target enough to really kind of smear the reputation of the target, which is what they did to David here and his wife by sending pornography to the neighbor in the name of David.
On social media, the Steiners' home was listed as the site of yard sales and sex parties. And then, this book about surviving the loss of a spouse, addressed to David, arrived at the Steiners' doorstep.
It was a death threat, and to be followed up a few short days later with a funeral wreath, an expensive funeral wreath, it only confirmed that these people were going to hurt or kill Ina.
So by the time they get to tactic number 5, which is intimidation, the goal is to really incite fear and paranoia to the point to where the targets begin to make mistakes, big mistakes that essentially would destroy their reputation and even force them to be incarcerated or perhaps thrown into a mental institution or mental hospital.
You were afraid for her life.
I was terrified I was going to lose her.
Police at first thought it might be a small-town prank. David installed more security cameras at their home. But for 3 weeks, the threats and packages kept coming.
As this is going on, what's it like to be inside your house? When it would get dark out at night, that's when I would really be terrified. You guys started sleeping in separate rooms at one point?
What we wanted to do is to make sure that if someone did break in, that at least one of us could either call the police or escape.
The Steiners were afraid inside their house and afraid to leave it.
Again, guys, I want to emphasize the fact that the goal under tactic number 5 is to incite fear and paranoia. You can see that was the goal and that was the plan for David and his wife, to the point to where they would be afraid to live in their house, and they would also be afraid outside of the house. That leads us to tactic number 6, which includes stalking, tracking, and harassment out in public.
After David noticed a van and later a car following him, he was terrified, but managed to get a photo of the license plate. That broke open the case.
I'm a guy who likes to dig up things. I sometimes don't get the end result, and that's why I rely on smart guys like this.
Natick Detective John Haswell was working the case with Sergeant Jason Sutherland. He ran the license plate of the car that had been following David.
And it came back to a rental agency, and I contacted the rental agency and I got the name of the renter, Veronica Zay. I didn't know anything about the Steiners at this point other than what was going on with them.
Keep in mind, guys, that this is a multi-million-dollar corporation who is involved in tracking and harassing their employees. And they're using the principle of plausible deniability, which includes purchasing everything with gift cards and also following them around in the streets using rental cars.
So this was the first time that I called them. I said, are you familiar with the name? And they weren't. And while I was saying that, I think Mrs. Steiner did her own little search and said, oh my God, she works for eBay.
I don't know. I can't describe how flabbergasted we were. eBay? I mean, what was an eBay employee doing in a rental van following David? Did she
It blew her mind.
send all these things? Was it eBay that did this to us? I mean, it was inconceivable.
Sergeant Sutherland tracked Veronica Zay's rental car to the Boston Ritz-Carlton and called her from the lobby.
And I fully expected her to come down and say, hand me a business card and say, I'm from eBay and we're doing an investigation, and yeah, I drove by the house. We called up to the room and she said she'd be down after she had a conference call. She never showed up.
Zay left town without talking to police, but Detective Haswell had been chasing down another lead. He learned the funeral wreath sent to the Steiners was bought with a gift card from a grocery store in Silicon Valley, not far from eBay headquarters.
Yeah, they're less than 8 miles away, and he was able to get photographs of them purchasing the gift cards, and it was Veronica Zay again.
The FBI took over. 10 months later, the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts, Andrew Lelling, announced the indictments of 6 employees and contractors from eBay.
The complaint alleges that the victims were targeted because eBay executives were unhappy with the coverage of eBay on the couple's website.
It didn't take us an hour to realize the ramifications of a public company trying to destroy a journalist. They were attacking the First Amendment, freedom of the press. They wanted to destroy Ina and our publication.
Former federal prosecutor Andrew Lelling says the plan to target the Steiners was hatched at eBay.
What was unique about this case is that you had relatively senior management at a Fortune 500 company who thought it was a good idea to launch what can only be described as a campaign of terror, targeting a middle-aged couple in Natick.
Why?
Well, the why is actually harder than it seems.
Investigators learned in April of 2019, eBay's then CEO, Devin Wenig, shared a link to this post Dinah had written about his annual pay. eBay's chief communications officer, Steve Weimer, wrote back, "We're going to crush this lady." About a month later, Wenig, the CEO of eBay, texted, "Take her down." Prosecutors say Steve Weimer later texted eBay security director Jim Baugh, "I want to see ashes, as long as it takes, whatever it takes." Just a few days later, investigators say Baugh set up a meeting with his security staff at eBay's California headquarters, posted a map of Natick on the wall, and then dispatched a team to Boston. 7 people who worked for eBay's safety and security unit, including 2 former cops and a former nanny, all pled guilty to stalking or cyberstalking charges.
All right, so I just want to point out the fact that this whole stalking and bullying harassment campaign against the Steiners was kind of launched by senior management of a Fortune 500 company. And they employed their employees to actually carry out the stalking. As you can see here on the screen, there were 7 employees who were involved, 2 of whom were ex-law enforcement officers. So this is just not unique to people, say, within a religious organization. Evidently, this is kind of the playbook that's passed around to anybody that wants to get rid of anyone who is involved in blowing the whistle on a corporation, blowing the whistle on a religious organization, anyone that has any information or knows anything that someone with a lot of money doesn't want them to know. In the case of, like, Micah Miller, in the case of Sonia Massey, in the case of many others, including what I believe even the mass shooting that took place just this past week. In every case, you find law enforcement involved, you find senior management or senior leadership team at a religious organization like a church, or even in the case of individuals within the community. Most of the time, it's people within the community, it's people within your family, it's people that know you who can turn out to be your worst enemy. It's kind of a very ruthless, cruel case of betrayal that they carry out on one person. And in all cases, guys, everyone's getting paid to do this. So it's about the money. The reason why people do it is because of the money that they're offering. So the bigger the company, the bigger the religious organization, the more powerful the community representative is, the more people that he can get involved or she can get involved in this stalking, harassment, bullying, smearing campaign that takes place against a target.
Senior Security Director Jim Baugh was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Veronica Zay was sentenced to a year of home confinement and probation. But to date, eBay has not been charged with any crimes. The company said in a statement to 60 Minutes, the conduct of the former employees was wrong and it has cooperated fully with the government investigation.
The plan was hatched in eBay's headquarters in a conference room. It was paid for ultimately by eBay. Don't they bear any responsibility for this?
They may, but cases are common where an employee inside a company uses company resources to do wrong. In every one of those cases, it's not necessarily true that the company itself is responsible.
And Lulling says there was not enough evidence to file criminal charges against eBay's top executives, Devin Wenig or Steve Weimer.
But when he says or texts, "I want to see ashes, whatever it takes."
People say things like that all the time, especially senior people in companies. It's not the same as I am knowingly joining a criminal conspiracy to cyberstalk a couple in Natick. People use loose talk like that all the time.
You know, guys, whenever I hear people talk like this representative of eBay, I can't help but to think to myself that he's involved in it as well. Because how can you have text messages from senior management saying, "I want to see ashes, let's take her down," so on and so forth, and say that the company as a whole is not involved and should not be indicted on this? The company is involved. This is senior management involved. These guys represent the company as a whole. Not only that, they use 7 employees of their own to actually do the stalking and harassing and bullying. See, this goes on in every corporation, guys. This is kind of like the cancer plague in America and around the world now. Many people are involved, and they kind of keep a tight lip on their involvement because they're getting paid. And usually they're getting paid 365 days out of the year, because there's always someone that the company or the religious organization wants to keep quiet or wants to destroy. And they want to do it in such a way where they can kind of have hands off and kind of make it look like it was the person's fault that was the target.
It's obvious that it started from the top.
Jaleese McDonough and Rosemary Scapiccio are representing the Steiners in a civil case against eBay and its former executives.
If you're in the C-suite, it's your job to know what your employees are doing. How to just sit back and say you didn't know, especially when good things were happening and you know, the share prices were increasing. They were all, you know, patting themselves on the back. We did that. But then when something like this happens, they turn around and say, we had no idea. We had no idea this was happening.
We've seen these text messages from Wenig and from Weimer. I was under the impression they turned over all their text messages. That didn't happen?
No. Weimer deleted his text messages. There was a notice that went out to everyone to say, there's this criminal investigation, preserve the evidence. Weimer immediately deletes everything. That's obstruction of justice. If I did that, I'd be sitting in a jail cell somewhere right now.
The current U.S. attorney has said the investigation into eBay is ongoing. Steve Weimer was fired for cause by eBay and now runs the Boys and Girls Clubs of Silicon Valley. He has said his texts were mischaracterized and that he learned of the employee's conduct only after the fact. The former CEO, Devin Wenig, said in a statement to 60 Minutes that he was appalled at what happened, and had he been aware of it at the time, he would have stopped it. Wenig resigned from eBay in September of 2019 with a $57 million exit package.
So you can always follow the money trail. It's always about the money. The CEO retires with an exit package of $57 million. That's what happens when you participate in corruption and when you do evil and carry out corporatized evil and revenge on employees or people who, for whatever reasons, go against the grain, against the corporation. Until next time, guys, take care.